Good evening. It is 7:06 p.m. on Monday, July 11th, and I call to order this regular meeting of the Richfield School Board. Thank you for your patience as we work through some technical difficulties with our live stream. Attending this evening's board meeting live in the boardroom are board members Eric Carter and Allegra Smishek. Joining us remotely is board member Crystal Brockie. I am Board Chair Tim Paulus, and we are joined at the table by Superintendent Yanowski, and we are also joined by Board Secretary Laura Otterness. Other members of the district's leadership team will be in attendance and will be participating throughout the meeting as well. Thanks to all of you for joining us here live and in the boardroom, as well as the legion of you joining us on the live stream or on a delayed feed on YouTube. Thank you for being with us. With that, our first item of business this evening is to approve the agenda before us. If anyone is willing to move the agenda or make amendments, we're open to suggestions.
I will move the agenda as presented.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Smishek and a second by Mr. Carter. Is there any final discussion? Just so for those playing along at home, when we have someone joining remotely, we do voice votes for everything. So I will poll the board. I will start with Ms. Brockie.
Aye.
Mr. Carter.
Aye.
Ms. Smishek.
Aye.
The chair votes aye, and the agenda is approved. That brings us to the next section, which is information and proposals, non-action items. This is our only meeting in July, and therefore it provides an opportunity for public comment. However, no members of the public signed up to speak to us, and none are here requesting accommodation, and so we'll move then to the superintendent update. Superintendent Yanowski, take it away.
Yes, so one presentation today, a continuation from our last meeting, vision cards with a focus on the two areas we had not completed, just because we had to finalize some of our data in regard to academics, climate, and culture. And so while we do know in this room the things that are about vision cards, we'll just repeat overall real quick for those watching. So our vision cards overall are our public accountability reporting system and help us remain focused on our top priorities. We do have 5 vision cards, one for each strategic plan strategy, so one for academics, we're talking about that today. One for climate and culture, we're talking about that today. And then the 3 cards, activities, business and operations, and communications and marketing, those are part of our conversation at our last board meeting. As a reminder, each vision card in the board packet has 3 pages, and those are at the end of this presentation. We have one showing our overall progress, sort of that progress report, one with a list of the key actions we have done over the course of this year, and then also the rubric for assessing progress on each of those measures. And those are in their entirety in the board packet. Just as a reminder what it looks like, each of that cute little bar you see at the bottom of the screen with a -2, -1 R, and then a 1, 2. And so you'll see areas below that baseline are areas we need to be concerned about and intervene upon, and ones in level 1 and 2 to the right side of the bar are areas where we are making progress. These aren't the only measures we take. We also look to disaggregate our data. Sometimes there is a gap between white students and BIPOC students. Sometimes there is not. And so that will be one of the things we also look at and focus on. And then also as a reminder, because we are launching these out and COVID did sort of change our data collection some, we are just gathering baseline data. And so there will be continued progress as we look on into the future. From an academics perspective, as a reminder, those in red help us to see progress to the overall goal. And so in academics, we had a wide range of data points that we gathered data. And what we are finding is that there are those that made significant gains and then areas of concern. And so it was intermittent forward and also backward in some of those areas. As you look at the second part of academics, we had some success in our class size data. We stayed relatively similar in terms of course offerings, and then seal of biliteracy and also looking at post-secondary options. Those were areas where we're going to need to put some additional focus because we had some data that did not reflect what we were hoping to see. We did put a wide range of work in these areas, looking at a new warehouse system and continuing with our PLC and our coaching cycles, learning walks to gather data, using our COVID relief funds to focus on these areas, and then also allocating our budget for small class sizes. Some additional areas, but again, I'm not going to end up reading every bullet, just giving some of the synthesized high points and things for us to overall focus on. As we think within each of the goal areas, what you'll see is green, which indicates moving forward, yellow, which indicates small moves forward, and red, areas of concern for us to focus on in the future. So for example, we had a small gain in overall graduation rate. We did have a gap that grew from 0% to 3%, something that we need to really monitor. We also saw in our 7-year graduation rate a significant increase of 4.4 points, so kids who are continuing to move on and move forward over the course of years. We maintained the same students enrolled in college credit classes, stayed very similar in the demographics of students in college credit classes, and then also maintained similarity, and something also we want to continue focusing on regardless is the number of students scoring proficient on the 3rd grade reading test. At the same time, we noticed that COVID definitely had a disparate impact as the gap between white students and students of color grew. As we look at the 3rd grade reading, something we definitely need to put some pretty intense focus on as we move forward to next year. At 5th grade, we did see some significant gains in those scoring on the 5th grade Teachers College benchmark. At the same time, we also similarly saw a gap, and that gap grew. And so again, something that we clearly need to put significant focus on as we move into the next school year. As we continue on, and again, this pattern of COVID having a disparate impact and differently impacting different demographic groups, 8th grade MCA, we saw a 2-point gain, but we also saw a 3-point growth in the gap between white students and students of color. And so you're noticing the pattern and something that we obviously have to put time, focus, and our equity lens towards. We've been training staff in the STAT process to make sure that we are putting systems of pre-referral interventions in place. As we look at our impact in special education, we saw a reduction of the gap of identification of students of color versus white students. So some success from an equity perspective there. Moving on from academics themselves, class size averages, where we set targets. 22 at elementary, 24 at middle, and 27 high were our averages. Those are strong and things that we want to be achieving, and so we're proud of those numbers. We decreased 1 course offering at the high school from 202 to 201. And then we also saw a negative outcome in regard to fewer seals of biliteracy, fewer students enrolled in post-secondary education, and then also a slight growth in the gap also in students, white students and students of color enrolled in post-secondary education. And so from an overall perspective, we had areas of success and obviously some very significant areas to focus on, specifically in the disparate impact of how these last year or so impacted students of color in comparison to our white students. As we look at climate and culture, you will see, looking at a couple of data point areas, looking at office referrals and demographics, looking at staff members who are supporting social emotional learning, and then also making sure that we have family groups and student groups in to support our students, and particularly those who are traditionally marginalized. We also are looking at student conferences and also the number of RPS students reporting volunteering in the community per year. And obviously with COVID, that's been a challenge specifically. We have continued on in activities with equity professional development, trying a new minor discipline behavior form, looking at ongoing social emotional learning and mental health therapy expanded offerings, adding a volunteer coordinator. One of the great learnings of COVID was adding conferences both in person and virtually, and then also a resource fair for the first time we had, specifically targeting special ed families. So as we look at office referrals, we did see a decrease in the number of office referrals. As we look, again, we had that 1-year gap where students weren't in school as often, and so we're going to continue on focusing in that area. We also saw a gap reduction of 1%, but we also had a gap of 10%, so still something, again, we want to continue to focus on. We've increased by 2 staff members last year, and as we talked about our budget, we're going to see a continued increase in that area and something we continue to focus on. And we've continued to add groups to support opportunities for our students and for our families to meet and partner and work together. We did see a decrease pretty significantly in the number of hours volunteered in the 2022 class versus 2021. Still totaling almost 9,000, but well over 600 hours fewer in terms of volunteering. And again, those opportunities were much more sparse when you look at what was available. And so with that, areas of success, areas to focus on, a clear need for us to have that lens really firmly parked, looking at equity and the impact of our work to continue to reduce gaps. And so with that, I will pause and turn it over to board members.
Thank you. If we could, I will start on my right with Ms. Smishek. Is that fair?
Let's do it.
Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you for providing the data. I'm just kind of sitting in my emotions a little bit with it. It is something we all knew that there would be gaps based on our formative data and just our experiences the past couple of years, but it's still fairly disappointing. That being said, I did notice that in areas where staff actions had a direct impact on the goal, that those were highly successful. So I'm really seeing that RPS staff and leadership is doing what they say they're going to do. Where it seems more challenging is when it's dependent on what the students do. Does that make sense? So I can give an example if that's helpful. We can control class sizes and we can control course offerings, but we can't force students to take the seal of biliteracy.
Sure.
Does that make sense? Anyway, so that was just an observation I had, and it's got me wondering how we can target those areas that we influence but don't control.
So I think if we objectively look, first I think your assessment's a little generous. I think that when you look at some of our academic achievement results and we talk about workload adjustments where we stop PLCs or reduce them, we no longer require collaboration time. We have many of our team members subbing and giving up prep time in every classroom, every district person, every coach. A lot of the things that we have done to leverage actual student outcomes, we had to actually pull back on to get by. And so I think we made some conscious decisions around workload that were about adults and necessary decisions to continue to make it through. And we are seeing those outcomes in terms of students. So.
That makes sense. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Carter, do you have questions or comments?
I do. I'm just, right now, I'm just curious about your most recent comment. And I know we've got open staff positions, and I'm guessing I guess I'm trying to predict in my head your answer. So I'm just going to ask my question, right? It's why not try to get some extra staff, not necessarily with the intent of reducing or changing class size, but if the issue is workload, why not try to hire extra staff to help reduce workload?
So if you do recall at our last meeting on our budget, we've actually already spent almost an extra $1 million above what our budget can manage. We are deficit spending for next year, and so we are hiring additional staff to the greatest extent possible. One of the things from last year, if you think about it, is there were COVID quarantines, which may or may not continue, and a sub-pool that had reduced not just here, but around the entire metro to about 30% of the actual population of the typical sub-pool. So we had more staff out, and we had fewer subs available. And then as you think about overall workload, people giving up their prep so they can't work to do the planning that they had to so that they could cover for other people. So yes, we're hiring extra staff. We are trying to, but we also can't hire staff to just be subs. We do have a premier sub pool, and we've had several subs in each building that we've added as part of our collaborative work with Education Richfield to sort of take some of that workload off. But the amount of staff absences based on COVID and based on this past year make it very challenging.
So then I'm going to ask that dumb question: is why can't we hire staff as subs?
So, well, we have hired 2 to 3 per building as premier subs, and I guess I would then reflect back, how many people would you want us to hire? And how much money would we want to allocate towards that? Knowing that if not needed, they're not filling the same job role and responsibility. So, it's a complex budgetary and staffing process, right? So most people don't want to be hired in April as a sub unless they actually just want to be a sub. Most people want to be hired as a teacher with a classroom or with a specific assignment. And so for us to have a cadre of people without a specific assignment is something we have budgeted for to the extent that we believe is feasible. And we could certainly have HR examine the possibility for more.
I mean, also, one of the things I heard you say is that if when the illness happens and our teachers are losing their prep time, is there a possibility of, even though I'm here, I get a sub for an hour to go ahead and get more prep time? I mean, because I lost it earlier in the week. I'm just trying to think of
Yeah.
so maybe the question is like, can we think about the problem differently? Right, and it's like, and I get that, we've talked before about there's a bunch of open staff positions. And so even if we have extra, there's extra open, right? It's like, so.
Right.
You're not really getting extra. I mean, I get it, right? That's why I was like, I'm asking that, yeah.
So I filled out a survey. I'm going to tangentially connect for the state of Minnesota, and I'm on the state licensing board. And there is a statewide shortage of subs, and there is a statewide shortage of special education teachers and paraprofessionals. So we can post, and we can't find. And so some of the challenges in this are, there isn't a list of people waiting to take some of the jobs, not in Richfield, in the state of Minnesota. And so it is not as simple as finding and hiring the extra people. We'd love to be able to do that. We have if you look back years in history, 5 years ago when this wasn't a challenge, we could have staff pulled out for professional development, for additional collaborative planning time, and we used to do those sometimes as practices. The level to which we have been trying to just support physical people in classrooms, we have had to do different things, right? We have had to have an administrator or multiple paras in an auditorium with students while people are teaching them online. We've come up with a bunch of creative solutions, as have other districts, but there is, I think it's a 3.6% unemployment rate. There just aren't the people.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, some specific questions. Back to slide 11. Do we have any idea why the gap widened our graduation rates? And then, kind of the follow-up to it immediately is, statistically speaking, the numbers are pretty small, right? 67 to 64%. And if our overall student population at the senior level is like 250, right? Are we really talking like 1 or 2 students? Because at some level, putting the number in helps. It's still not good.
Yep.
But I feel like the number where we were talking about at a previous meeting where it's like the number of Asian students dropped.
Right.
And it's like because there were 2, and like one of them, right? It's like, so it makes the number look really bad, but
This is 5 to 7 people,
yeah.
Right.
roughly, which is probably not statistically significant.
Right, it is a small number. We can certainly look at it as a small number, and we could present it that way and examine. And so Laura will take a note about looking at it and presenting it that way in the future.
Or both ways.
Yeah, or putting both those data points in. Yeah, and the other, yeah.
Do you have any idea why?
I believe what we actually saw was and I'd have to go back. I believe it was a relatively large jump in the graduation rate for white students.
Okay.
And so, but I would need to go back.
Okay. On college credit, on page 12, if there was still a gain, why is a gap of 6% yellow?
So yellow are the areas that we still need to put some focus on.
Okay.
Because we're not happy with a gap of 6, but it is not a high concern.
I'm sorry, I'm saying it wrong. So if yellow is saying it's a gain, but this is actually a deficit.
Yes, yellow is either side by
got
very
it.
close
Okay.
amounts.
Okay. And then this is a question I typically ask before. on slide 13, there's like 2 shades of red. Is like one, like a worse red? So for those in the crowd, I
Right,
do ask a
right.
lot of questions behind the scenes too.
Right, right, one
Right.
is, one,
Well, so honestly, our director of communication went on vacation in between gathering some of the data,
Yeah.
and some of the data had to be gathered later.
Yep.
And so a second person probably looked at that
Okay.
slide and
So
did
it's
that.
not,
So that is not a
Right.
purposeful
Okay.
act. That
Yeah.
is, that
font
is.
font sizes are, I mean, if we're gonna pick it all apart, right, font sizes are different.
Right.
One is black
I'm
colored
tough.
font and one is white
Right.
font in the red, you
it's
know.
attention to details.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, that is, I would assume that is a second person.
This is like if I did it.
Good check. So
To be
then, the last and probably the most important question would be is, so then, what, like, of these red items, is like,
Yep.
when will we expect to see next step on trouble areas?
Um,
And not fixing it, but what our plan is to
What the plan
fix it.
is, right.
Right, so as we think about goals and we look at the things we're doing next year, so what we do is we present the cards, we do my evaluation, we then bring admin back in August, we start working on goals get presented, sort of the cycle, so I suppose you joined in January. So the cycle that starts in August, September, October is we set goals for the year and define the work that we're doing based on the things that you have been hearing.
Got
So
it.
it just
Okay.
continues to extend.
Yuck.
Ideally without being reactionary, but we should have corrective action on things instead of just saying,
Right.
Correct.
It's bad.
Correct.
Okay. That's it.
that's it?
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Carter. Excellent. That was great. Ms. Brockie, do you have questions or comments?
Just a few, and I'm gonna look here where I have my notes, typed next to me. So, the decrease in, students entering into post-secondary options, I think is largely consistent with national trends over the last year. So I don't really have any Richfield specific questions for that, and know that people are thinking about how to respond and be supportive to our students. What I was curious if we did have any more insight into was the decrease in the seal of biliteracy.
We don't have that information, but I can talk to Dr. Wilhite, and gather that.
Okay, thank you. And then the second thing is actually not one of the items that we measured this year, but I think is on the list of items for measurement in the future, and that is around volunteering. It's specifically the volunteering for community and family members to do within our schools. And my initial question is whether or not we have a policy or a guideline that governs that.
A policy.
There's a graduation requirement
There-
for
yeah, I know there's a
volunteering.
graduation requirement for it, but I don't believe there is a policy for students to
I'm
do
not
it.
talking about the student graduation requirement. I'm talking about having community members, whether
Oh.
families or otherwise, volunteer in the schools.
I would need to re-examine because I know we changed things very significantly with COVID. So we do have some, I know there are procedures. I'm not sure if it's a board policy. And there, and again, we changed it very significantly with COVID.
Okay. I think I would be curious to know the answer, and the question is also rooted in the experience that I've had multiple times of people saying that they would like to volunteer, and then me feeling like I'm the bottleneck because I don't actually know where to point them or what the process is, and wondering if there is a more systematic way that we could approach this so that when people are voicing interest, there is actually a clear process that exists. And it's something that people can access on their own instead of like trying to figure out who to talk to about what. So seeing that in the vision card and knowing that we're actually going to be measuring that and holding ourselves accountable to it made me think about it from a process standpoint.
Yeah, so we will look to Mr. Wislow, who has those documents. I know I've seen them. Clearly, I am hearing, and our communications people are listening also, that we need to do a very good job in the fall of communicating that out extremely clearly, and probably on multiple occasions. Because again, we are hopeful that we'll be back to open buildings.
Great.
Or-
Thank you.
right, thank you, Ms. Brecky. I had a couple of questions relating to the presentation. When we mentioned the number of students in college credit-bearing classes, we're counting, just for clarity, students enrolled in an AP class, a college in the schools class, and also PSEO?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. The other one is relating to the referrals. In one spot, we mentioned the stat process.
Yes.
Could you spell out what staff members trained in stat process, what it means? I see rubbing of temples.
So I'm going to give you one of the, is it on our acronym list, which isn't in the board package?
Which is not in this
Here's what
report,
I'm going
right?
to say. So I will describe it rather than trying to come up with
Fair.
it, which is prior to a student being identified for special education, there are a system of interventions and data and supports that should be put into place. That is what STAT stands for, and so there's a team, the STAT team, that comes together to examine, support, and ensure that kids are getting the supports that they need. And back a long time ago, students who were struggling were often just identified for special education without support.
Okay.
And so this is to ensure that there is a systemic process in place, and that is the STAT team.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Okay, so then, unrelated to that, but only the word referrals carries over to my second one. We speak, goal number one, decrease the number of office referrals per semester. And we're referring back to pre-COVID times, and we have a decrease. We're using that, I think, as a proxy. There's also been some adult behavior changes, but really what we're hoping to have is fewer episodes where a student might, where a student's behavior leads to them being possibly referred.
Correct. It's really about the incidents, right? We
Okay.
want our students engaged in learning so
Okay.
that they don't have to miss learning, and so it's measured by students being engaged in class, and one of the things we want to reduce for that is students being removed from class.
Okay. It's just, okay, so I just want to clarify that so that I can understand it better. Thank you. I don't have anything else to say or questions, so thank you for the presentation. Does anyone else have final questions or comments?
Quick response, I did look at the state report card real quick while we were talking. The reason for the gap increase in graduation rate, Latino students went up by 2 points, black students went up by 3 points, white students went up by 6 points. So we had a larger gain in that overall amongst white students than students of color.
I did think of one more, actually, now that
Yes.
you've bought me some time. We speak of class sizes, and I know Mr. Carter had asked before the meeting about sort of a central reference point for how other districts have class size. Does the ECSU?
Yeah, Metro ECSU does a class size study. It comes out about February of each year. That typically gets sent on to board members. I can certainly go back and find it
Right.
and send it on. That is a set of maybe 30 or 40 metro area districts.
Thank you. If you have that as a resource, if you could share it with the board, that would get to the question Mr. Carter had before the meeting. All right,
I
thank
will
you.
look it up.
Wonderful. Well, with that is the only.
I'm so
Okay.
sorry.
No, that's quite all right.
There was no graceful way to just cut in. I just wanted to voice a thought that I'm having as a result of the superintendent looking up that information on the report card. I think it's highlighting a potential flaw in our system in that we want to hold ourselves accountable for gap closure, but I think we also need to hold ourselves accountable in celebrating that there was growth across all of the areas that we're talking about, and it feels like we should find a way that both of those things can be true.
Agreed. So if we think back, and yes, as Eric talked about numbers and percentages, I think those are important things to say. We did talk about that in my goals in terms of achieving growth for that. But yes, we definitely have to do that. So thank you for pointing that out.
All right. Well, with that, we conclude the superintendent update. There are no commendations tonight, so we move to the consent agenda. This is the basket of relatively routine items that we consent to pass without individual discussion. So before entertaining a motion on the consent agenda, I will pause and see if someone has an item from the consent agenda they wish to remove for further discussion. And hearing none, we could entertain a motion on the consent agenda.
I'll move the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Smishek and a second by Mr. Carter. I will poll the board. Ms. Smishek?
Aye.
Mr. Carter?
Aye.
Ms. Brockie?
Aye, and I'm sorry if I'm yelling. I'm gonna try to be quieter. I heard I'm loud.
And the chair votes aye, and the consent agenda is approved. Mr. Carter is noticing that there is a lot of pressure on the board members who are in the boardroom to move and second items if they wish. It's tough when we're a little lighter in the room. There's more action per person. It's okay. Thank you, though, for stepping forward. And Crystal, I don't think it's a you problem. We don't need to have you whispering in just because our volume is set at a strange level. Consent agenda is approved, and we move now to old business. And first up is policy 102, educational opportunities. And this is what number, Reed?
This would be third and perhaps final read of policy 102, equal educational opportunity, basically stating that we prohibit harassment and discrimination of any kind. And so we have updated this, presented it twice, shared all of the revisions. There is nothing substantial or new in it for us today. So this is presented for hopeful passage.
All right, I will pause there and open it to the board if anyone has questions or comments about the update as presented. There is some red line, but that was present, I believe, in the prior
Correct.
iteration. So there's nothing new within the changes, and it is a third read. If
I
there-
do not have any questions.
No questions or comments. Well, with that, if there are no questions or comments broadly, we could entertain a motion as a third read.
I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Mr. Carter and a second by Ms. Smishek. Any final discussion on policy 102? All right, I will poll the board. Ms. Brockie?
Aye.
Ms. Smishek?
Aye.
Mr. Carter?
Aye.
The chair votes aye, and policy 102, educational opportunities, is approved as presented. Next up is policy 101, strategic plan and administrative guidelines 101.1.
Right, and so 101 is the exact same as we had presented it at the last meeting, haven't taken feedback. And then page 63, we put a header in to make it clear that the strategic plan is the administrative guideline for 101.1. So again, we have this one for you for recommended hopeful passage.
So I've got a dumb question.
Okay?
No
The-
dumb questions.
Well, we've talked about standardization, and I thought we standardized, I mean, in here it says Board of Education versus School Board, and we've kind of flip-flopped back and forth. Weren't we gonna land on?
I thought we landed on Board of Education, didn't we?
I thought we landed on School Board. That's why I was like, when I saw this last night, I was like, wait a minute, I'm like,
I will go back and double.
The last few meetings, I feel like it has all been Board of Education, because I've noticed that it's all been lowercase.
and that too, right?
Yes, we'll wait for Ms. Valley to text the update, the real answer, and we'll speculate and fill the
Right.
void instead.
Well, and I will say it is Ms. Quam that
Okay.
does these and has aligned them to the style guide. I tend to believe it has been Board of Education lately, but
These are the exciting things we talk about.
I do
These
know-
are the
I
exciting
do know
things.
that we've made them lowercase and not.
yes, I believe it's Board of Education.
Just ordinary nouns.
Hopefully our English teachers aren't criticizing us here as we go.
Oh, I hope my English teachers are criticizing me. It means they don't turn it off, which is
So I could
okay.
always bring it back if I'm wrong, but I am hoping for a recommendation for passage.
I'm supportive of it, other than I mean, can we approve it with that cleanup?
Yes. We can.
Yes, you can approve it and say, if style is incorrect, please change it. From Board of Education to School Board.
Yes, if we were to approve it, it doesn't mean it's relegated to a 5-year wait to be addressed. We can address things off-cycle, or we can address things, and we could even bring back, reapprove it with the only changes being stylistic style, I guess editorial style, or
Well, and if it's a guideline, not a policy, or then it's a procedure, right? Then it's not actually.
Well,
approved?
the board policy is the 101, and that does have Board of Education in it, right? So,
I will move passage of policy 101.
I guess I'm seconding it.
Well, you know, you don't have to. It's only if you really
Well, again,
wish to see it at a vote.
my only issue with it is, again, the standardization. If it's,
Okay.
you know, if we're fixing or
Okay.
reviewing the standardization, I'm fine with the policy itself.
Okay. The substance of it, you're fine with. It's just that
Absolutely.
we will have a style review or an update probably at the next meeting, is my
yes,
suggestion.
or if I'm wrong, yes, I will bring
Okay.
it back at the next
Okay.
meeting if it is not the new style.
Perfect.
Right, so as long as you're content with the substance of it, we can move
Absolutely.
the item, I
Yep.
think. Okay. Is there any additional discussion or final discussion of policy 101? All right, I will poll the board. Ms. Smeshek?
Aye.
Mr. Carter? Ms. Brockie?
She just lost sound.
Well, that is unfortunate.
Go to Ms. Mishek.
I started with Ms. Smeshek. The chair votes aye.
Okay, Crystal is giving us the thumbs up and is giving us her vote aye.
Crystal has indicated a vote of approval.
And the sound is out for
Okay.
Ms. Brackey.
Meaning that we cannot hear her, but she can hear us, correct?
Can you hear us, Crystal? She cannot.
All right.
All right, so I'm going to put her on my phone at the moment. Okay, all right, so I'm going to put you on speaker so that you can hear us and we can hear you while this is happening.
Mute myself.
Perfect.
All right.
Old school technology right there.
It's a stew of technology. We're doing great. Okay, that concludes the old business and brings us to new business. First up is policy 104, drug-free workplace and drug-free school.
All right, and so this is first read of a, I believe, 6-year-old policy. Purpose is to maintain a healthful environment, prohibiting the use of alcohol, toxic substances, medical cannabis, and controlled substances without a physician prescription. So there are a general statement of policies around possession. There are definitions. There are exceptions given in regard to who may be accepted from certain components of the policy, and then also the procedures for following through on that. And so again, this is here for a first read. I will pause, and again, first read, then there's input, second read, and then review. And then we go from there.
All right, so
Oh,
again.
Crystal can hear us again. So she is good.
She's
Okay, we're
back.
good now.
Wonderful. So as a first read, you know, if we can offer editorial comments or substantive comments here, if they're largely editorial, we can offer them directly to the superintendent or the board secretary. That said, I'll open it up. Mr. Carter, do you have questions you'd like to bring forward?
On this one, I do.
All right.
I'm guessing some of my questions are not going to be able to be answered tonight. So I'll fire them off, and then you tell me whether or not we need to delay or if you've got answers now. So the first one is, by definition, isn't medical cannabis a controlled substance with a physician's prescription? And therefore, why wouldn't we allow it on school grounds?
I don't have a for sure answer. I have been advised that there is a difference in state law and federal law, and so we will need to go to MSBA and gather additional information on that to bring back to the board at the next meeting.
Okay. Then the next question is, under number 2, general statement of policy, letters A and B, it would seem that we would need to spell out that it's okay to have controlled substances with a physician's note. Because if people can take them or use them, it would seem that they could have them in their possession.
It sounds like an area to clarify in terms of the language. Okay?
Next one is same section under letter D, random canine searches. This is probably a bigger discussion, and there may be a need inside the schools. I'm curious why we're doing more than what the MSBA template is suggesting.
Great question. As I told you, I have never used a canine search, and so I would need to gather more information on why or what we would use them for.
Okay. Under definitions, letter A, why do we need any more detail than alcoholic beverages? So it spells out different types of alcoholic beverages.
Right.
If it contains alcohol, by definition, we don't need to spell out anything else.
Yes. I actually, it's interesting. I was thinking about that when you mentioned it. I'm wondering if malt beverages is like a 0% alcohol near beer or fake beer prohibited, but I don't know.
No,
It's a-
I think it's the other direction.
Malt beverages,
Tend to be
I mean, there's a whole
It
category
doesn't say
with,
malt liquor beverage.
Touche.
right?
It
It
does
says
not.
malt beverage. So
says
I'm
malt
thinking like
beverage.
a brand that has a 0.0 or like a.
Heineken Zero, for example.
Got it. Well,
No
okay.
product.
So it's
Are-
unclear either way, so we definitely need to gather information.
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, is something that's 0.0 like an O'Doul's or a Heineken Zero banned on premise?
I don't know. That is, so clearly we need to figure out clarification because that would be a malt beverage, right?
It would be, I mean, yes, by definition of it, it would be, what we would want to ban is malt beverages that contain alcohol, is my suspicion, above a certain threshold, right? You can be an NA beer, for example, at 0.5% ABV and below. So there are some that are 0 and there's some that are
Yeah.
0.5. That said, our decision to allow or ban those, we could be clear on those.
Well,
More
and
clear.
it's an interesting question because I would probably argue that I wouldn't want to see students walking around with a Heineken Zero on campus, right? Or an adult for that matter, because then you have to ask questions.
Yes.
Right, so,
Right, that gets to the, disruption to the day that
Right.
it could cause.
so maybe we do need to have that in.
So that is something for us to examine. Yep.
Okay.
But liquids that contain alcohol have presence within, that aren't necessarily beverages, right? You could have, vanilla extract is like 40% alcohol, and it would probably be present in some of the food and consumer science classes at the high school. And we would not want to ban that, otherwise we
Right.
wouldn't have any vanilla in any of the cookies or cakes that were made. Things like
Yeah.
that. So there are ways to clear this up, I suspect.
Okay. Under number 3, definition C, who's the commissioner?
Yeah, something to definitely look at. Could be Commissioner of Education or Health or somebody else. Yep.
Under number 4, exceptions.
Yep.
And I think this kind of pertains to one above, but why is medical cannabis excluded? Don't we, and I specifically asked this next question, but don't we believe that doctors know what they're talking about? And I just think about that in regards to our discussions about COVID, right? It's like, we trust the doctors, we trust the CDC, so if a doctor prescribes it, right, would it be covered? I think that's my
We will
last.
investigate all of this, yes.
Yep, that's it.
All right, thank
Just
you,
a few
Mr. Carter. Ms. Smishak, do you have questions or comments you'd like to share?
I do not, thank you.
All right, Ms. Brockie, yes or no questions?
No questions.
All right, thank you. Well, thank you for the thorough read, Mr. Carter. This is one, I guess, as I look through some of we haven't looked at this one in 6 years. Prior to that, it was 8 years. And so it's, at the time that this was last reviewed, it may have that was probably the first time that medical cannabis was even considered. And it was heavily restricted within the state at the time, if not still banned. I forget the timing of that.
So a
That's-
lot of changes have occurred.
A lot of changes have occurred at the state level. They have not necessarily changed at the federal level still. And that may be some of the friction, but we'll leave that to someone else to instruct us. It's not going to be me deciding where that line is necessarily. All right. So that is a first read. Again, if anyone has any editorial or other comments they'd like to have considered, please make sure you share those with the superintendent or other members of the administration. All right. Moving forward, the next item up is a resolution for membership in the Minnesota State High School League for the 2022-2023 year.
Yes, all right, so every year, we need to re-resolve to continue to make ourselves members of the Minnesota State High School League. It is a membership fee per school up, $160 up from $110. Basically, the ability to compete and participate is essentially required to be a member of the Minnesota State High School League. So we do this on a yearly basis. Our designated board rep is Tim Paulus, and so we are looking for a resolution from the board.
Right, for background, for those who are not familiar with this, every now and then it comes up, someone asks, what would happen should we choose not to be part of it? We would struggle to find opponents. We would not be, no one who's in the State High School League, schools who are members of it, would be able to play us. So when you think of our regular schedule for our activities, it would pretty much be a blank slate at this stage. So it would be very challenging if we alone went out and tried to do that. Statewide, there is a lot of comment about the activities fee, the membership fee going up, and impact, and perhaps disparate impact on larger schools versus smaller schools, et cetera. And I don't have the specific numbers of how it impacts us. And again, we'll have, we don't have a lot of flexibility on it. It just is.
Fair enough.
Questions, comments?
Just on the last comment you made, so it's 160 for our school,
Correct.
not like per student.
Not per student, no. There is an additional fee, I believe. I mean, there is a fee per activity that which you sponsor. So if you had 2 teams versus 12 teams, you would have a different amount to pay. And I'm not positive if it's on a per student basis. I think that's some of the tension that some of the smaller schools feel, is that their programs are collectively smaller. And so a flat fee per activity might have a higher impact on them on a
Got
per
it.
student basis than it would, say, at a school that's overflowing with participants.
Okay, thank you.
Does anyone have any other, and my role as the designated board representative is that was one that was assigned as our liaison assignments in January, February timeframe. It is a fairly light touch. I don't get asked to do anything almost, but certainly not by the State High School League. They just, they more or less take action and tell you what happened, so.
That actually was my question, which is, how are we represented in terms of action and in terms of direction? Because I will be direct and say there have been a number of incidents over the last year where I have watched and wondered how decisions are being made there. And I honestly am not sure how we have a voice, if it's through our activities director, if that seat has a vote, if it is through some other representative. A short answer would be helpful.
The official representative is our activities director. That's buried at the bottom of the background information paragraph. And so I believe the activities directors have a more active and practiced voice in addressing concerns to the State High School League. My role as board representative, they don't ask the board representatives much of anything. I voted on something once. I definitely did that.
We do get a good representation of the Tri-Metro, and so our athletic directors, we have a governing board, we come together regularly, and we have sent voice up about a number of things, disappointment in not supporting certain sports, disappointment in responding or not responding to racial issues, and just we have come together with a unified voice in the Tri-Metro and sent that through our activity directors.
Thank you, that's helpful.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Mr. Carter?
Well, sorry. Just thinking about what you said, it's like if they weren't listening right to the feedback, and we had to come together as a larger metro council to go ahead and give feedback to the state. When we commit to this, we commit for the entire year. We couldn't pull out mid-year, for example.
I mean, we could make a decision to pull out at any point, but then we would no longer be participating in any form of activities that we didn't organize ourselves.
Okay.
So it is essentially a monopoly of a business. And then I would say, I don't think it would be fair to assess that they don't listen. I would say they don't necessarily adjust to what our voice might be all of the time. And to acknowledge that there are some very differing voices out there.
Yeah.
That might have an opposite perspective than our conference.
Yeah, thank you.
Right. As I said, if we went alone, it would be very lonely. If we went with 20 other schools just like ours, you could assemble a competition list for some of the activities, perhaps not all. And then you run into, the challenges that presents. You'd have to do so with a very good plan in place. Otherwise you'd wander into chaos, and then you'd have some very unhappy activities participants wishing they had somewhere to go to participate in their activity. Okay. So with that, if there's no other discussion and people feel like they could support it, we could entertain a motion, or we could continue discussion. The deadline on this, I imagine, is sometime before the school year begins.
I believe it is July 15th. So I believe we are looking to push this forward, hoping for a recommendation this
Okay.
evening.
Okay.
I will move approval of the resolution for membership in the Minnesota State High School League.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Smishek and a second by Mr. Carter. Any final discussion? As a resolution, I will poll the board. Ms. Baraki?
Aye.
Ms. Smishek?
Aye.
Mr. Carter?
Aye.
The chair votes aye, and the resolution is adopted. Next up under new business is Richfield Maintenance and Transportation Building Change Order number 004.
All right, small change order number 4 in the amount of $13,734. Build a chase for data cabling, mitigation of moisture infiltration, and corroded door replacement, including adding some pumps to drain condensation for the new furnaces. Brings it up from $340,141 to $353,875. Still within overall budget, and we have the funds within our facility maintenance update to make this change.
All right. If anyone has any specific questions on the maintenance and transportation change order, change order, please feel free to share them. Otherwise, we could entertain a motion.
I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Mr. Carter and a second by Ms. Smishek. Any final discussion? All right, I will pull the board. Mr. Carter?
Aye.
Ms. Smishek?
Aye.
Ms. Baraki?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye, and the change order is approved. That brings us through new business. There are no donations. We are now to advance planning. First up on the list is legislative update, and I don't believe there's anything to share.
You are correct.
All right, still in the, we're not going to have a special session. Okay, which is, at some point, right, the ship has sailed, perhaps.
Most likely, yes.
Okay. We move then to information and questions from the board. I will poll the board and see if they have anything they'd like to share. So I'll start with Ms. Baraki.
I do not. Thank you for your flexibility as we just deal technologically with me being able to participate from afar, but I'm grateful that it was an option tonight, so thank you.
You're welcome. I'm super grateful. As it turned out, it was necessary, and I'm glad that you had the forethought to share the address at which you're located, so that members of the public could visit and bear witness to this spectacle that it is. Ms. Smishek, do you have information or questions to share?
You don't.
Mr. Carter, information or questions?
I do not.
All right. The chair also has no information or questions to share, which moves us then to future meeting dates. The next meeting is Monday, August 1st, 7 p.m., a regular board meeting right here in the boardroom, 7 p.m. The meeting after that is August 15th. That is a regular board meeting, 7 p.m., and that meeting, as the second meeting of the month, will have an opportunity for public comment for those who wish to address us if they were to sign up. Does anyone have any suggested or future agenda items? All right. With that brings us to the next item, which is a closed session. For those who are watching at home, we are proposing to move to a closed session as allowed by Minnesota Statute 13D.05 for superintendent evaluation. With that, to move to closed session, we need a motion to move into it.
I'll move into closed session.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Smishek and a second by Mr. Carter. Any final discussion? I will poll the board. Ms. Smishek?
Aye.
Mr. Carter?
Aye.
Ms. Baraki?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye, and we will move into a closed session. For those watching on the live stream, what we will do is we will move to closed session where we conduct business in private. And the only business we will conduct will be related to, as described, is we are conducting a superintendent evaluation, as we do every year. Following that, we will re-enter an open session, but the only thing we will do at that point is adjourn for the night. There are no more business items that we will conduct in public. So if you are watching at home, this is probably the end of the line for you of what would be interesting. So thank you and have a good night. We will adjourn now for a brief recess and move to closed session.